Hey, so how does our present Greek, critical Greek New Testament, how does that compare with other ancient literature?
Bruce Metzger called it something like an embarrassment of riches, which is a phrase I have adopted and used many times since. That is, we have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to New Testament manuscripts. When it compares to other ancient literature, the New Testament far and away has earlier and more manuscripts than anything else from the Greco-Roman world. When I say far and away more, it's stunning how great the difference is. The average Greek or Latin author has less than 15 copies of their original work still in existence today. Now, you look, and I'm talking about in all languages, whether it was translated in other languages or not. The Greek New Testament has, in terms of those copies in all languages, well over 1,000 times more copies
Hmm.
than the average Greco-Roman author. Now, when you look at somebody as well known as Homer, the most popular of the ancient Greek writers, and he gets a 800-year head start on the New Testament, that is far and away the most popular uh, ancient writing we have apart from the New Testament. We have, last count was less than 2,000 copies. So you've got, for the Greek New Testament, we have about 5,500 copies. But then when you count the versions, and I'm doing this across the board with all these, I'm comparing apples with apples. We have about 10,000 in Latin. We're not exactly sure. We have several thousand in Syriac and Coptic. These are our three earliest and most important versions. We have other versions. Altogether, among the versions and the Greek New Testament, we have, I think, conservatively, at least 20,000 handwritten copies of the New Testament. Now, are these complete copies of the New Testament? No, of course not. Neither do we have that many complete copies of other ancient Greco-Roman literature. So we're still doing a straight comparison. But the average Greek New Testament manuscript is over 400 pages long. And we have manuscripts that go back to the second century, within just decades of the completion of the New Testament. You compare that to Greco-Roman literature, we have virtually nothing that comes close to that. In fact, the average Greco-Roman author is waiting half a millennium at least before we get any copies of his writings. For the New Testament, we're waiting half a century. It's a huge difference.
That's amazing. You know, I've got a book here. Um, the title of it's Text and Transmission, edited by Reynolds, L.D. Reynolds, and published by Oxford University Press. Um, this book is a $400 volume. If you want to buy it from Oxford, $400. Um, and but it was there's roughly 100 Latin authors from the Greco-Roman period, and it talks about the major manuscripts that are involved to put together a critical Latin text of these authors. And it says there are approximately, there are lots of manuscripts, but there are only approximately 1,700 that are used to construct the critical Latin texts when all of these authors are considered. And some of them are
Volume is only 1,700.
only 1,700 for all of them combined. And that's for about 100 Latin authors.
Mm.
And but some of them are really good. Most of them are between almost all of them are between the ninth and 15th centuries. So just for example, you've got Suetonius, who's regarded as the greatest Roman biographer. Plutarch considered the greatest of all ancient biographers, but if you just want to look at the Roman, you'd say, bracket Plutarch, and you're looking at Suetonius. And for Suetonius, when you look at the data, Suetonius's Lives of the Caesars, the 12 Caesars, is based, there's over 200 manuscripts that we have, but they are all derived from a single manuscript that's dated to the ninth century. And then you've got Tacitus, one of the greatest Roman historians, And so he wrote the annals, he wrote some other things, he wrote the histories. In the annals, books 1 through 6 are based on a single manuscript that's dated around the year 850, the mid 9th century, or about 750 years after the original. And then you've got books 7 through 10 are missing. And then you've got books 11 through 16 and the histories. They're based on a single manuscript that is dated to the mid 11th century, or about 950 years, 930 years later. Now, Cicero's speeches are based pretty much on one. Well, the early there's only a few manuscripts, but the earliest is late 1st century BC, early the first half of the 1st century. So I mean, we're only looking there between 10 and 100 years after Cicero actually wrote. So,
really impressive.
Yeah, so that's really good, but that's the exception to the rule. And I think for Plutarch, at least for the 9 lives or biographies he wrote that I spent a lot of time with, there's only about 50 manuscripts. And you've got one that's written within a century of the autographs, a fragment, but by far most of them are 9th to 15th centuries. So it's really interesting to compare these things and hear you say it. So that's an interesting book, and I will get that one to you.
On one side with pages cut on the others, and that flipping pages. That's a codex, our modern book form, invented in the 1st century AD. P52 is X you'd write on both the front and the back side, while as a papyrus roll you'd write just on the inside of the scroll. Now, there are a number of other manuscripts that have also been dated to the 2nd century, but P52 still stands probably as the oldest. We can certainly say we have manuscripts from the 2nd century. Do we have any copies from the first half of the 2nd century? That's much more debatable. And of course, the problem you've got is none of these early manuscripts has a date written in it. We don't get dates written by scribes. It's in what's called a colophon until centuries later, when they say, I wrote this on Friday, November 3rd, this year, or something like that.
So how many confidence were written in the 2nd century?
Well, the numbers there are as high as 12 to 15 now, with the recent publication of some manuscripts. But let's take, for example, this codex. I think it's Papyrus 139. Maybe it's 137. I've forgotten. It's this new fragment